They say the pines of Pinewood still whisper his name. Isaiah Cole, a black Union soldier who came home from war hoping for peace, and found his preacher swinging from a tree. The sheriff called it justice. The town called it order. But Isaiah called it what it was: murder. That night, something in him broke, and something older woke up. When the moon rose again, 3 Klansmen hung from the same trees they once used for others, their hoods nailed to bark, their badges shining in the dark. He didn't march or pray for freedom. He hunted for it. One by one, the riders vanished, their bodies left scattered through the pines like warnings carved in flesh. Some say he lost his soul. Others say he found it. But every man in Pinewood learned one truth: when justice won't come from heaven, sometimes it rides from the woods. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The church bell rang out across Pinewood County, its urgent clanging pulling people from their homes like moths to flame. They came running through the warm Alabama night, some still buttoning shirts, others clutching children to their chests. What they saw stopped them cold. Reverend Elijah Burke swung from the oak tree outside his small wooden church. His body turned slowly in the night breeze, the rope creaking against the sturdy branch. His feet dangled 6 feet above the ground, his Sunday shoes pointing down at the trampled grass below. A burning cross, tall as a man and wrapped in oil-soaked cloth, hissed and spat nearby, casting dancing shadows across the horrified faces of the gathered townsfolk. In the distance, the sound of hoofbeats faded as hooded riders disappeared into the darkness of the pine forest. Isaiah Cole pushed through the crowd, his broad shoulders and determined stride parting the stunned onlookers. He'd just stepped off the northbound train, returning from 3 months laying railroad track in Tennessee. The canvas bag he carried dropped from his fingers when he saw the hanging man. "Reverend," he whispered, his deep voice breaking. The crowd murmured and shifted. Black faces showed fear and grief. White faces displayed mixtures of horror, satisfaction, and carefully blank expressions. A woman sobbed quietly, her face buried in her hands. Sheriff Thomas Grady arrived on horseback, his boots hitting the ground with a thud as he dismounted. He adjusted his hat and surveyed the scene with cold blue eyes. He wore no expression as he approached the hanging body. "Cut him down!" Isaiah demanded, stepping forward. Sheriff Grady turned slowly, measuring Isaiah with his gaze. "Isaiah Cole. Back from up north, are we? Just in time to see justice served." "Justice?" Isaiah's hands curled into fists. "What was his crime?" "Stirring up trouble," Grady replied coolly. "Teaching things that got no business being taught. Writing letters to Montgomery about good Christian folks here in Pinewood." He stepped closer to Isaiah. "A man should know his place in this world." Isaiah looked up at Elijah's body, at the piece of paper pinned to his robe. Even in the flickering light of the burning cross, he could make out the words, "Know your place." "I aim to cut him down," Isaiah said, moving toward the tree. Sheriff Grady's hand dropped to his holstered pistol. "You ain't doing nothing of the sort. This here's county business." 2 deputies flanked the sheriff, hands resting on their weapons. "The law's been satisfied tonight," Grady continued. "Anyone interferes with this display will find themselves keeping the reverend company." His eyes swept the crowd. "That goes for all of you. This stays till morning as a reminder." Isaiah took another step forward, but strong hands grabbed his arms. Virgil Poe, an older black man who ran the livery stable, held him back. "Not now, son," Virgil whispered urgently. "Not like this." Too many guns. Isaiah's body tensed like a spring about to uncoil, but after a moment, he relaxed slightly in Virgil's grip. His eyes never left Sheriff Grady's face. "Smart move," the sheriff said, with a thin smile. "Now everybody go on home. Nothing more to see." The crowd began to disperse, some quickly, others lingering with uncertainty. Isaiah remained rooted to the spot, staring at his mentor's body, swaying gently in the night breeze. "He taught me to read," Isaiah said quietly. "Helped me write letters to my mama after the war. Never harmed a soul." Grady's smile disappeared. "Reading's what got him killed. Giving folks ideas they got no business having." He leaned in closer. "You do well to remember that, soldier boy." The sheriff mounted his horse and rode away with his deputies, leaving Isaiah standing in the shadow of the oak tree, the burning cross still casting its hellish light. Hours later, after the last townsperson had gone home and the cross had burned down to smoldering embers, Isaiah returned with a shovel. But finding the tool inadequate for his grief, he cast it aside. Instead, he dug at the hard Alabama soil with his bare hands, fingernails tearing, skin splitting as he clawed out a grave beside the church. All night he worked, the moon watching his solitary labor. He spoke no words as he dug, but tears tracked clean lines down his dust-covered face. When the hole was deep enough, he carefully cut down the Reverend's body, cradling it as gently as a sleeping child. Isaiah washed Elijah's face with water from the church well, straightened his clothes, and folded his hands across his chest. He placed the Reverend's worn Bible on his breast before lowering him into the ground. Each handful of dirt he placed over the body seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. As he patted down the last of the soil, Isaiah spoke his first words since beginning his task. "They will remember this night," he promised the fresh grave. "Every last one of them." The eastern sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn. Isaiah knelt at the grave, his bloody hands resting on the mounded earth. Crows gathered in the branches of the oak tree, their black shapes like blots of ink against the lightening sky. "If they want ghosts," he whispered, "I'll give them one." At his words, the crows burst upward in a rush of wings, scattering across the dawn sky like dark thoughts taking flight. Morning light spilled through the burned church windows, casting golden beams across the charred remains of pews and hymnals. The air still carried the sharp scent of smoke, mixed with the sweet smell of pine sap from the exposed beams overhead. Where once stood a modest house of worship, now lay a skeleton of blackened wood and ash. Small hands sifted through the debris, children searching for anything that might be saved. A little girl with pigtails held up a hymnal, its edges burned, but its center pages intact. A boy nearby collected scattered nails in a tin cup, the metal clinking with each new find. "Careful of splinters," called Sarah Burke, watching the children from what remained of the church doorway. She stood tall and straight, despite the grief etched into her face. Her dark skin contrasted with the white collar of her simple dress, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Though only 26, her eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen far too much. Isaiah Cole moved methodically through the ruins, lifting charred beams and clearing away debris. His movements were precise, military in their efficiency. The children gave him a wide berth, sensing something dangerous in his quiet concentration. "You won't find much," Sarah said, stepping carefully over a fallen roof beam. "They were thorough." Isaiah nodded without looking up. "They always are." His hands were wrapped in strips of cloth, covering the raw wounds from digging Elijah's grave. Blood had seeped through in places, leaving rusty stains on the white fabric. "The children wanted to help," Sarah explained, watching as a boy rescued a small wooden cross from beneath a pile of ash. "I couldn't tell them no. Some things need to be mourned properly." "Your father was loved," Isaiah said. Sarah's eyes glistened. He taught most of these children their letters, fed them when times were hard. She paused, watching Isaiah work. "What exactly are you looking for?" Isaiah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved toward the pulpit, or what remained of it. The wooden structure had partially collapsed, its front panel burned away. He knelt beside it, running his bandaged fingers along the floor beneath. "He always stood here," Isaiah murmured. "Said it was the closest spot to heaven in all of Pinewood County." Sarah approached slowly. "He called it his standing ground. Said a man needs a place to plant his feet when speaking truth." Isaiah's fingers found a seam in the floorboards, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. He pressed down on one end, and the opposite side lifted slightly. With careful movements, he pried up the board, revealing a small space beneath. There, wrapped in oilcloth and untouched by the fire, lay Elijah's Bible. Isaiah lifted it reverently, unwrapping the protective covering. The leather-bound book looked ordinary enough, worn at the edges, its pages yellowed with age and use. But when he opened it, something caught his eye. Notations filled the margins, names written in a careful hand, alongside verses about judgment and righteousness. "He kept records," Sarah said quietly, kneeling beside Isaiah. "Every Sunday, he'd announce the donations given to the church. Names and amounts, all proper-like." She traced a finger along one margin where Wilson Tanner, 5s, was written. "But these weren't just donations." Isaiah looked at her sharply. "These are names," she continued. "Men my father saw at night, riding with hoods, places where crosses burned, dates when colored folks disappeared." Her voice remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly. He was building a case, gathering proof to take to the federal marshals in Montgomery. Isaiah turned the pages slowly. Dozens of names filled the margins, some marked with small crosses, others with stars or other symbols. At the back of the Bible was a carefully drawn map of Pinewood County, with routes and meeting places marked in the same neat hand. "He knew who they were," Isaiah whispered. "All of them." Sarah nodded. "They discovered what he was doing. Someone must have told." She closed her eyes briefly. "The night before they took him, he told me to make sure you got this if anything happened." Isaiah's jaw tightened. "He knew they were coming for him?" "He knew the risk," Sarah said. "But he believed in the law, in justice." Her eyes met Isaiah's. "Not vengeance." Isaiah carefully rewrapped the Bible in its oilcloth. "There's a thin line between the two, Miss Burke." "Not to my father," she replied. "And not to God." Isaiah stood, tucking the Bible inside his coat. "I'm not sure God's been paying much attention to Pinewood County lately." That night, in the small cabin he shared with no one since his return from the war, Isaiah spread the pages of Elijah's Bible across his table. A single oil lamp cast long shadows as he meticulously copied each name onto a separate sheet of paper, arranging them by location and suspected rank within the Klan. Sheriff Thomas Grady's name appeared multiple times, often with a symbol that Sarah had explained meant leader. Beside it were names Isaiah recognized: the bank manager, 2 deputies, several prominent farmers, even the owner of the general store where he'd bought supplies just that morning. Men who nodded to him on the street, now revealed as monsters who rode by night. Isaiah worked with the focus of a man preparing for battle. The soldier who had survived Antietam and Gettysburg now turned those same skills to a different kind of war. Each name he wrote was a target, each location a battlefield to be studied. When he finished mapping his campaign, Isaiah reached beneath his bed and pulled out his old army haversack. From it, he removed a cavalry saber and Union bayonet, both wrapped in an old blue uniform jacket he hadn't worn since '65. The metal gleamed dully in the lamplight as he drew the bayonet across a whetstone. Each stroke was deliberate, the scraping sound rhythmic and soothing. Outside his window, the moon rose high and cold over the pine forests of Alabama. Isaiah tested the edge with his thumb, nodding with satisfaction when it drew a thin line of blood. He wrapped the Bible carefully in a clean cloth, tying it with string before placing it back in his haversack. "I'll finish your sermon, Reverend," he murmured to the empty room. "I'll speak it in a language they'll understand." In the distance, Beyond the edge of town, where the forest grew thick and dark, a horse whinnied from somewhere deep in the pines. Isaiah's head came up, listening intently, his hand still resting on the sharpened blade. The sound came again, then faded into the night, leaving only the chirping of crickets and the whisper of wind through the trees. 2 nights later, the moon hung half-hidden behind drifting clouds, casting shifting shadows across the forest floor. Deep in the pines, where the trees grew so thick they blocked the stars, a group of men gathered in a small clearing. Their white hoods glowed eerily in the darkness, their voices hushed yet confident in their isolation. A small fire burned in the center of their circle, illuminating 5 hooded figures. One man swayed slightly as he stood, his hood askew, revealing patches of red-tinged whiskers and a mouth wet with liquor. "Pass that bottle, Virgil, for you drink it all," one of the men said, extending his hand toward the swaying figure. Virgil Poe clutched the whiskey bottle to his chest, like a child with a favorite toy. "You should have seen that preacher's face," he slurred, ignoring the request. "All high and mighty, always talking about brotherhood." He spat into the fire, causing the flames to hiss. "Not so high and mighty with a rope around his neck." The others laughed, though one shifted uncomfortably. "Keep your voice down," warned a tall figure with a slight limp. "Sound carries at night." "Who's gonna hear?" Virgil challenged, taking another swig. "Ain't nobody out here but us and the owls." None of them noticed the shadow that moved between the distant trees, a figure dressed in black, blending with the darkness, circling their position with patient, deliberate steps. "Sheriff says we need to lay low for a spell," said the tallest man, his voice carrying authority despite being muffled by his hood. "That Cole fella's been asking questions." "That railroad nigger?" Virgil snorted. "What's he gonna do? Run crying to the Yankees?" He laughed too loudly, the sound echoing through the trees. "He fought for the Union," the uncomfortable man said quietly. "Heard he was at Gettysburg." "Then he should know when he's beat," another replied, stoking the fire with a stick. "Elijah Burke thought he could gather evidence against us. Look where that got him." The shadow paused at these words, now still as the trees themselves. Virgil lifted his bottle in a mock toast, to teaching that preacher his place. As they drank, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond the firelight. The men froze. "What was that?" one whispered. "Probably just a deer," the tall one answered, but his hand moved to the pistol at his hip. The shadow moved again, circling to where their horses were tied. With a soldier's precision, Isaiah Cole cut the reins, sending the animals bolting with a series of gentle slaps to their flanks. The horses crashed through the underbrush, their panicked whinnies filling the night. "The horses!" one man shouted, jumping to his feet. 2 men rushed toward the sounds, disappearing into the darkness. The remaining 3 drew weapons, backs to the fire as they peered into the night. "Who's out there?" the tall one demanded. The only answer was the flutter of a night bird, startled from its roost. Isaiah moved like smoke, years of battlefield experience guiding his every step. He bypassed the 2 men chasing horses, focusing on the 3 by the fire. The first man died without a sound, a bayonet between his ribs, quick and efficient. The second barely had time to turn before Isaiah's blade opened his throat. Only Virgil Poe remained, stumbling backward, whiskey bottle shattering on the ground, as he fumbled for his gun. You can't," he stammered, hood slipping to reveal terrified eyes. Isaiah stepped into the firelight, his face calm, almost blank. "They said the same thing at Antietam." The shot echoed through the trees, followed by silence. By the time the 2 men returned, having failed to catch the horses, they found only an abandoned fire and emptiness where their companions had stood. "Virgil?" one called hesitantly. "Jackson? Meeks?" They searched the small clearing, finding nothing but Virgil's broken bottle and a scrap of white fabric stained with blood. "We need to get the sheriff," the second man said, voice shaking. They turned to leave and saw them. 3 bodies swung gently from the branches of nearby pines, the same trees where colored men had dangled over the years. Their hoods had been removed, their faces exposed, their identities clear for any who might pass. Below each body, nailed to the trunk, hung the white hood that had once concealed them. Dawn broke over Pinewood with whispers of terror. Word spread quickly through the town. 3 men found hanging in the pines, their faces bloated, their hoods nailed below them like trophies. Sheriff Thomas Grady stormed through the streets, his face flushed with rage. "I want the name of every stranger in this county," he shouted to his remaining deputies. "Every colored man who's shown any disrespect." In the small room behind what remained of the church, Sarah Burke bandaged Isaiah's arm where a bullet had grazed him. Her movements were gentle, but her eyes were troubled. "3 men dead," she said quietly. "This will only bring more suffering to our people." "They started this," Isaiah replied, his voice steady. "I'm just showing them what it feels like to be hunted. My father believed in justice, not murder." Sarah pressed the bandage firmly against his wound. "Was what they did to your father justice?" Isaiah asked. Sarah's hands stilled. "No, but what you're doing isn't either." She tied off the bandage with a sharp tug. "Vengeance is a poison, Isaiah. It will doom us all." "Then let it doom me first," he answered, standing to leave. "I made a promise at his grave." That evening, as storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Isaiah sat at his table with Elijah's Bible open before him. With slow, deliberate movements, he crossed out 3 names from the margin: Jackson Willis, Meeks Howard, and Virgil Poe. "One for each rope," he whispered, his finger tracing the lines that canceled their existence. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, the first heavy drops of rain striking his window like thrown pebbles. The storm had come to Pinewood in more ways than one. Early morning mist clung to the pines like ghostly shrouds. Sheriff Thomas Grady knelt beside the 3 bodies now laid out on the ground, their faces waxy and pale in the weak light. His men stood back, hats in hand, shifting uncomfortably as crows called from nearby branches. "Cut 'em down like animals," Grady muttered, examining the clean slashes across 2 of the men's throats. The third, Virgil Poe, had a bullet hole centered in his chest. This wasn't random. This was planned. His fingers probed the muddy ground where the bodies had been placed. Something metal glinted in the soil. Grady brushed away the wet earth and froze. There, half buried in the mud, lay a deputy's badge, the same one he'd given to Deputy Wilson last month. Panic flickered in his eyes before he could mask it. He quickly pocketed the badge before his men could see. "Sheriff?" one of the men asked. "What did you find?" "Nothing," Grady snapped, rising to his feet. He wiped his hands on his pants, leaving smears of red-brown mud. "Just a button." But his mind raced. The killer knew. Not just about the Klan, plenty suspected who wore the hoods, but about which of his own deputies rode with them at night. This wasn't just some colored man seeking blind revenge. This was someone with knowledge. Whoever did this knew exactly who they were hunting, Grady said, his voice tight. "And they're sending us a message." "What kind of message?" asked one of the younger deputies. Grady looked up at the 3 empty nooses still swinging gently from the pine branches. "That they ain't finished." By afternoon, Grady had posted new rules throughout Pinewood. No colored people on the streets after sundown, no gatherings of more than 3. All former slaves must carry papers showing their employment. "For their protection," Grady explained to the concerned store owners, "until we catch this killer." Meanwhile, Isaiah Cole walked freely through town, nodding politely to white folks who passed. His military bearing and calm demeanor rarely drew suspicion. He entered the blacksmith's shop, where several men waited for horseshoes and repairs. Among them stood Virgil Poe's brother, a thin man with the same red whiskers, but none of the dead man's swagger. He nursed a flask, eyes red-rimmed with grief, or drink, or both. Isaiah approached the man, keeping his distance. "Sorry for your trouble," he said quietly. "Heard about your brother." The man looked up, surprised by a colored man addressing him directly. "What's it to you?" he slurred. "Lost my brother in the war," Isaiah said, the lie coming easily. "Know how it feels, is all." He pulled a small bottle from his coat. "Sometimes a drink helps." The man's eyes fixed on the whiskey. After a moment's hesitation, he accepted it. "Obliged," he mumbled. Isaiah watched patiently as the man took several long swallows. The blacksmith, busy with his hammer and anvil, paid them no mind. "Your brother ride with the sheriff's men?" Isaiah asked carefully. The whiskey had already loosened the man's tongue. "Sometimes. Weren't no regular deputy, though. Just helped out when they needed extra hands." He wiped his mouth. "Sheriff's got all sorts helping him keep things the way they should be. Sounds like important work." "Important enough," the man agreed bitterly. "Fat lot of good it did him." Isaiah leaned against the wall, his posture casual, though every sense was alert. "Must take a lot of men to keep the peace. More than you'd think." The man took another drink. "All sorts, too. Drunk men talk in the lodge, things they probably shouldn't say." His words slurred together. "Like Grady. Always bragging about your brother." Isaiah's heart stopped. "My brother? Not your brother. Course not." The man waved dismissively. "The Cole boy, Caleb. Grady calls him his token proof the nunchiers can be tamed." He laughed humorlessly. "Keeps him close. Shows him off to shut up them northern sympathizers." The name hit Isaiah like a physical blow. Caleb Cole, his younger brother, who'd followed him into the Union Army and been reported missing at Cold Harbor. Not dead. Alive. Working with Grady and his men. "You sure about that name?" Isaiah asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. "Sure as sunrise. Dark fellow, walks with a limp. Got some ugly scars round his neck." The man squinted. "Come to think of it, y'all favor some. Same eyes." Isaiah forced himself to smile. "Common enough features," he said. "Where might a man find this Caleb?" "Lives out by Copper Creek. Little cabin the sheriff lets him use." The man's eyes were growing heavy with drink. "Stays out of town mostly. Comes in when Grady calls." The blacksmith finally looked up from his work. "You waiting on something?" he called to Isaiah. "No, sir. Just passing time." Isaiah nodded to the drunk man. "Keep the bottle." Outside, the sky had darkened. The first drops of rain began to fall, pattering against the dusty street. Isaiah walked slowly toward the edge of town, his mind a storm of confusion and disbelief. Caleb, alive. His little brother who'd once followed him everywhere, who'd wept when Isaiah first put on the blue uniform, who'd enlisted despite their mother's tears, the same brother he'd taught to fish, to read, to stand tall. Now, what? Grady's man? A traitor to his own people? The rain fell harder, forming puddles in the rutted road. Isaiah stopped, staring down at one that had formed at his feet. The water rippled with raindrops, but between the ripples, his own reflection stared back, dark eyes haunted with questions. For a moment, he saw not his face, but Caleb's, the way he remembered him, young and determined. Then the puddle stilled, and it was only Isaiah again, rain streaming down his face like tears. "Brother," he said softly, his voice nearly lost in the rainfall, "what have you become?" The afternoon sun broke through the clouds, turning puddles into mirrors that reflected the sky. Isaiah stood at the edge of the old Cole homestead, little more than a weathered cabin with a sagging porch, the place where he and Caleb had grown up together, where their mother had taught them to survive in a world that wanted them dead. Isaiah's hand hovered over the knife at his belt as he approached the door. His mind raced with questions. What would he say? What would he do if Caleb truly stood with Grady's men? Could he kill his own brother? Before he could knock, the door opened. Caleb Cole stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame. He wore a deputy's uniform, clean and pressed. The badge on his chest caught the sunlight. When he tilted his head, Isaiah saw the faint, raised scar that circled his throat like a macabre necklace, the mark of a rope that hadn't finished its work. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Two brothers separated by war and choices, by death and resurrection. "Isaiah," Caleb finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They said you were back, but I couldn't believe it." Isaiah's eyes never left the badge. "They told me you were dead." Caleb's hand moved to cover the badge as if he could hide it. "I nearly was." His fingers brushed the scar on his neck. "Captured at Cold Harbor. They strung me up for sport, but the rope broke." A hollow laugh escaped him. "God wasn't ready for me, I guess." "And now you wear their star," Isaiah said. The words tasted like ashes in his mouth. Caleb stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in, brother. Please." The cabin was small, but neat. A table with 2 chairs, a bed in the corner, a shelf with a few books. A picture of their mother in a simple frame. It looked like the home of a man trying to build something from nothing. "Why?" Isaiah asked as soon as the door closed behind them. "Why work for them? For Grady?" Caleb moved to a kettle on the small stove. "You want coffee?" "It's not good, but it's hot. I want answers." Caleb poured a cup anyway, his hands steady though his voice wavered. "You've been gone 8 years, Isaiah. You don't know what it's been like here. I know they hung Reverend Burke from an oak tree. I know they burned his church with children's books still inside. And how many more would they have hung if someone wasn't there to calm things down?" Caleb snapped, turning to face him. "I joined to keep order, Isaiah, to make sure our people survive." Isaiah laughed bitterly. "Order? Is that what you call it when they drag a preacher from his bed? When they burn crosses on people's lawns?" "I didn't say it was perfect," Caleb insisted. "But I've stopped worse. Much worse." He gestured at the chair. "Please, sit. Let me explain." Isaiah remained standing. "Explain how you ride with the men who would kill us all if they could." "I don't ride with them," Caleb said, his voice tight. "I work for the law. The law hung Elijah Burke." "No," Caleb shook his head. "Drunk men with hatred in their hearts hung him. I tried to stop it. I wasn't there that night, but when I heard—" "You did nothing," Isaiah finished for him. "Just like you're doing nothing now." Caleb set down his cup with a sharp click. "What would you have me do? Take up arms? Lead our people into a slaughter?" He pointed out the window toward town. "For every one of us, there are 5 of them. With guns, with power, with the courts on their side. So you bow your head and say, 'Yes, sir,' while they murder us?" "I keep the peace," Caleb insisted. "I make them see we can live together." Isaiah shook his head, disappointment etched in every line of his face. "You're a coward." Caleb flinched as if struck. Easy words from a man who wasn't here, who didn't see what they did after the war. The night riders, the fires. He touched his scar again. "I've learned how to survive, Isaiah. Quiet submission keeps blood from flowing." "Some blood needs to flow," Isaiah said softly. "The right blood." Alarm flickered in Caleb's eyes. "What have you done?" Isaiah didn't answer directly. 3 men helped hang Elijah Burke. 3 men now feed the crows in the pines. Caleb sank into a chair, his face ashen. "My God, Isaiah, it was you?" He ran a hand over his face. "Do you know what you've started? Grady's out for blood." "Good," Isaiah said, his voice cold. "Let him come." "You'll burn the whole town," Caleb whispered. "Our people will suffer for your vengeance. They suffer now." "It will get worse," Caleb insisted. "Much worse. Grady has friends in Montgomery, in Birmingham. He can bring hell down on Pinewood." Isaiah moved toward the door. "Hell's already here, brother. I'm just giving the devils their due." Caleb stood, blocking his path. "I can't let you do this." For a moment, they stood face to face, mirror images divided by a gulf of pain and principles. You gonna arrest me? Isaiah asked quietly. Caleb's hand didn't move toward his gun. I'm asking you to stop, before innocent people die. Innocents are already dying, Isaiah said. The only difference is, now the guilty are joining them. He brushed past Caleb and walked out the door, feeling his brother's eyes on his back like a physical weight. That night, rain tapped against the roof of Sarah Burke's small cabin behind the ruins of her father's church. Isaiah sat at her table, hands wrapped around a mug of tea as he told her about Caleb. My own brother, he said, staring into the tea as if it held answers, wearing their badge, speaking their words. Sarah's face was solemn in the lamplight. People do what they must to survive, Isaiah. Survival without dignity isn't living, Isaiah replied. It's just waiting to die. And what about the rest of us? Sarah asked quietly. If you bring Grady's wrath down on Pinewood, who will suffer most? Grady and his men will suffer most, Isaiah said, his voice like iron. I won't stop until they're all gone. Even your brother. Isaiah's face hardened. Caleb made his choice. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Sarah moved to the window, looking out at the gathering storm. There must be another way. A way without more bloodshed. You saw what they did to your father, Isaiah reminded her. You think they'll stop with him? No, she admitted. But I fear what you're becoming in your quest to stop them. Isaiah stood, placing his empty cup on the table. I'm becoming what they made me. A ghost that won't rest until justice is done. And after? Sarah asked. What will be left of Isaiah Cole when the killing is done? He had no answer for her. Instead, he moved to the door. Thank you for the tea. Sarah caught his arm. Promise me something, Isaiah. Promise you'll try to save Caleb, not destroy him. Isaiah looked down at her hand on his arm. I can only promise to finish what they started. He stepped out onto the porch as the first heavy drops of rain began to fall. Sarah stood in the doorway, the lamplight turning her silhouette golden against the darkness. Be careful, she called as he descended the steps. Ghosts can't come back to life. Isaiah didn't look back as he walked into the rain. The thunder rolled again, closer now, as if the sky itself were breaking apart. Behind him, the glow from Sarah's lamp grew smaller with each step, a single point of warmth in a world gone cold and dark. Rain pounded against the windows of the sheriff's office, turning the glass into a blurry veil. Lightning occasionally illuminated the street, painting sharp shadows across the muddy road before plunging everything back into darkness. Isaiah crouched in the alley beside the jailhouse, rain soaking through his coat as he watched the sheriff's office. Just after 9 o'clock, 3 riders appeared through the downpour. They dismounted quickly, tying their horses to the hitching post before hurrying up the steps. Isaiah's eyes narrowed as he recognized Judge Warren's distinctive limp. The other 2 kept their hats pulled low, but there was no mistaking the banker's round shape or Dr. Mitchell's tall, thin frame. They entered without knocking. Through the window, Isaiah could see his brother Caleb standing by the door like a statue, hand resting on his gun as the men removed their wet coats. Sheriff Grady emerged from the back office, smiling as he greeted them. Isaiah moved closer, sliding through the mud until he reached the side window. The rain muffled their voices, but when lightning flashed, he saw them clearly, pulling white hoods from inside their jackets, placing them on the table between them. Caleb's face remained blank as he watched, a guard dog serving his masters. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes. When the men left, they tucked their hoods back inside their coats. Grady shook each man's hand at the door before turning back to Caleb. Even through the rain-streaked glass, Isaiah could see his brother's discomfort as Grady clapped him on the shoulder. "Lock up," Isaiah read on Grady's lips. "Tomorrow, we send a message they won't forget." After they departed, Caleb stayed behind. He moved slowly around the office, straightening papers on the desk. His shoulders slumped like a man carrying an invisible weight. Finally, he blew out the lamp and left, locking the door behind him. Isaiah waited in the darkness, counting his brother's footsteps as they faded into the rain. Then he moved. The lock on the back window was simple work for a man who'd spent years breaking into Confederate supply depots. Isaiah slipped inside, water pooling at his feet as he stood motionless, listening for any sound beyond the drumming rain. When he was certain he was alone, he lit a small candle. Grady's office was neat and organized. A man who believed in order, at least on the surface. Isaiah moved methodically, searching drawers and cabinets. In the bottom desk drawer, he found what he was looking for: a leather-bound ledger hidden beneath stacks of wanted posters. Inside were columns of numbers and names, donations to the Pinewood Protection Society, the same coded list from Elijah's Bible, but with amounts beside each name. More importantly, there were notes in Grady's handwriting detailing purchases: rope, white cloth, kerosene, payments to men for night work, a record of terror, written in ink as black as the deeds themselves. Isaiah tucked the ledger under his arm and continued searching until he found a stack of official letters in the top drawer. He rifled through them quickly, finding what he needed. Correspondence marked Federal Inspection regarding complaints about local law enforcement. Earlier that day, he'd written to Sarah, urging her to contact the federal marshals about Elijah's murder and the subsequent killings. With careful precision, Isaiah placed the ledger between these letters, making sure it looked like part of Grady's official records rather than something hidden away. Then he erased all signs of his presence and slipped back into the rain, the candle extinguished by the wind. Morning brought clear skies and the unexpected sound of horses, not the usual local traffic, but the disciplined formation of federal marshals. 6 men in blue coats rode down the main street of Pinewood, their badges catching the sunlight. At their head, a stern-faced man with a thick mustache carried papers bearing official seals. Isaiah watched from the doorway of the blacksmith shop as they dismounted in front of the sheriff's office. Inside, he knew, Grady would be finding the ledger where any federal investigator would be sure to look. The marshals entered without ceremony. Through the open door, Isaiah could see their leader presenting documents to a confused Grady. Words drifted across the street: complaints, investigation, federal authority. Across the street, Sarah stood on the church steps, her face pale but determined as she clutched an envelope. Isaiah's letter, which she had forwarded to Montgomery with her own testimony added. When the marshal beckoned to her, she crossed the street with her head high, despite the stares of the townspeople gathering to watch. "That's her," someone whispered. "The preacher's daughter." Sarah's hands trembled visibly as she passed the letter to the lead marshal, but her voice was steady. "My father was murdered for teaching people to read, for teaching them their rights. There's your proof of what's happening in Pinewood." The marshal nodded gravely. "We'll need your full statement, Miss Burke." Inside the office, another marshal had found the ledger. Isaiah could see Grady's face darken as the book was opened, revealing its damning content. "What's the meaning of this?" Grady demanded, loud enough for those outside to hear. "Sheriff Thomas Grady," the lead marshal announced, "you are under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and violation of the Enforcement Acts." A hush fell over the gathered crowd as Grady was led out in handcuffs, his face twisted with rage and disbelief. His eyes scanned the onlookers until they locked with Isaiah's. For a moment, understanding flashed between them, the hunter recognizing the trap. By noon, word had spread throughout the county. The black community of Pinewood emerged from their homes cautiously, then with growing confidence. Children played in the streets without being hurried inside. Men gathered in groups without being dispersed by deputies. For the first time in memory, they walked unafraid. Isaiah observed it all from a distance, watching Sarah distribute books from her father's salvaged collection to eager children. He saw the hope on their faces, the cautious smiles of their parents. But he also noticed the state deputies who arrived as evening approached, speaking with the federal marshals in heated tones about jurisdiction and local authority. As dusk settled, the marshals prepared to leave. "Orders from Montgomery," Isaiah overheard one explaining to Sarah. "State's reclaiming jurisdiction. They're moving him to the county jail tonight." The hope that had brightened the day began to fade as quickly as the sunlight. Isaiah knew what would happen next, had seen it too many times before. Federal promises abandoned, local power reasserted, the cycle continuing. As night fell, he made his way to the jailhouse on the edge of town. Inside, torches flickered as deputies prepared for the transfer. Through the barred windows, he could see Grady sitting in his cell, still wearing that same confident smile, the smile of a man who knew the system would protect its own. Isaiah stood in the shadows across the street, watching the torchlight dance across Grady's face. "Justice," he whispered, the word both prayer and warning as he fingered the knife hidden in his coat. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of lightning. 2 dawns after Grady's arrest, the church bell shattered the morning quiet with frantic, uneven rings. Isaiah jerked awake in Sarah's barn, where he'd been sleeping since returning to Pinewood. The desperate clanging pulled him to his feet before his mind fully cleared. He grabbed his knife and rushed outside. People were already gathering in the street, faces twisted with confusion and fear. Deputy Wilson stood on the church steps, ringing the bell with one hand and gesturing wildly with the other. "Sheriff Grady's gone!" Wilson shouted as the crowd grew. "Cell's empty. Someone broke him out in the night." Isaiah pushed through the gathering townspeople. Some looked frightened, others secretly pleased. He caught fragments of whispered conversations. "Heard the guard got $50 to look the other way. Must have been his Klan brothers. God help us all now." Isaiah spotted Virgil Poe at the edge of the crowd, trying to slip away. He followed, catching Poe by the arm and dragging him between 2 buildings. "What do you know?" Isaiah demanded, pressing Poe against the wall. Poe's breath stank of whiskey, his eyes bloodshot and fearful. "Nothing. I swear, Cole." Isaiah tightened his grip. "You're lying." Poe glanced nervously toward the street. "Look, I wasn't there, but I heard things." His own kind let him out. "What does that mean?" Poe's eyes dropped. "One of your own. A colored deputy." He wiped sweat from his brow. "That's all I know. I swear it." Isaiah released him, a cold weight settling in his stomach. He didn't need to hear the name to know. He found Caleb at their old family cabin, packing a small bag. His brother froze when Isaiah entered, hand moving toward his gun, before recognition stopped him. "So it's true," Isaiah said, closing the door behind him. Caleb's shoulders slumped. "You don't understand. Then help me understand." Isaiah's voice remained low, controlled. "Help me understand why you freed the man who hung Elijah Burke." "To save lives," Caleb snapped, throwing a shirt into his bag. "You think you're so righteous with your killing, but Grady has friends in Montgomery, in Atlanta. Important men. If he'd been tried, they'd have sent 100 riders to burn Pinewood to the ground. So instead, you let the snake loose to bite us again." Caleb shook his head. "I made a deal. Grady leaves, never returns. The Klan keeps away from our people." "And you believed him?" It wasn't a question. "He gave his word." Isaiah laughed, a hollow sound. "His word? The word of a man who lynches preachers?" "It was the only way," Caleb shouted, his composure finally breaking. "What would you have done?" "Killed him," Isaiah answered simply. "Like I'll kill you if you stand in my way again." The words hung between them, brothers separated by more than the cabin's small space. Before Caleb could respond, a distant scream pierced the morning air, followed by another. Then came the unmistakable roar of fire. They both ran outside. Black smoke billowed from the far side of town, the colored section. Figures on horseback moved through the streets, torches in hand. "No," Caleb whispered. "He promised." Isaiah was already running. By the time he reached the colored settlement, 3 houses were engulfed in flames. Klansmen in half-masks rode between the buildings, firing at anyone who fled. Bodies lay in the dirt. Men, women who'd been dragged from their homes and hanged from porch beams. Isaiah grabbed a rock and hurled it at the nearest rider, knocking him from his horse. He took the man's pistol and fired at another Klansman, hitting him in the shoulder. "Run!" he shouted to a group of women huddled behind a water trough. "To the creek! Go!" More screams came from the direction of the schoolhouse. Isaiah sprinted toward it, ducking between buildings. Sarah had been teaching there since dawn. He'd seen her walking with her books as he headed to the barn last night. The schoolhouse stood intact, but its door hung open. Inside, overturned benches and scattered books showed signs of a hasty evacuation. Relief washed over Isaiah briefly. Sarah had gotten the children out. But where had they gone? The creek. It was their escape route, practiced during fire drills. Isaiah ran through the woods toward the water. He found small footprints in the mud, confirmation the children had fled this way. Then his blood froze. On a bramble by the path hung a torn piece of fabric, the distinctive blue pattern of Sarah's headscarf. He snatched it from the thorns, a sick feeling rising in his throat. Droplets of blood stained the cloth. Further along, the mud showed signs of a struggle. One set of prints digging in, being dragged backward. Hoof prints circled the area. The trail led back toward the pine forest, Klan territory, where they had hung Elijah. Isaiah knelt by the creek, clutching Sarah's headscarf. Everything had come full circle. The federal marshals, the arrest, all for nothing. Worse than nothing. Now Sarah was taken, and the town burned behind him. He moved with renewed purpose toward the hollow oak, where he'd hidden his war trunk years ago. The weathered box contained what remained of his military life, things too dangerous to keep in town, but too valuable to discard. Beneath uniforms and papers lay what he sought: 2 Springfield rifles wrapped in oiled cloth, a Colt revolver, and boxes of ammunition he'd smuggled home after Appomattox. Isaiah cleaned and loaded each weapon with practiced efficiency. As he worked, more smoke rose from pine wood, staining the blue morning sky with columns of black despair. He retrieved Elijah's Bible from its hiding place and secured it in his saddlebag. Blood from his cut hand smeared across its leather cover as he mounted the horse he'd borrowed from Sarah's stable. The animal sensed his tension, dancing nervously beneath him as he checked his weapons one final time. "They wanted ghosts," he muttered, turning the horse toward the pine forest, where the shadows grew deepest. "They'll meet one." Night fell over the pines like a burial shroud. A bonfire roared in a clearing deep in the forest, its flames casting twisted shadows across hooded figures who circled it like demons at worship. Their voices rose in drunken songs of victory and hate. Sarah Burke stood tied to a post near the fire, her dress torn, her face bruised, but her eyes defiant. Blood had dried on her temple where they'd struck her, but she held her head high, refusing to show fear. Sheriff Grady paced before her, no longer wearing his badge, but draped in the full regalia of the Klan's leadership, a crimson-trimmed robe that caught the firelight like blood. His hood was pushed back, revealing his face to Sarah. "You see, Miss Burke," he said, taking a swig from a whiskey bottle, "your daddy never understood his place. Now, you don't understand yours." He gestured at the burning town visible through the trees. "That's what happens when you people get ideas." Sarah spat at his. "My father died for truth. What will you die for, Thomas Grady?" The gathered men laughed, passing bottles between them. Some wore their hoods, others their everyday faces. The butcher, the banker, men who tipped their hats to ladies on Sunday mornings. Grady spread his arms wide, addressing his followers. "Brothers, tonight we cleanse Pinewood. We start with this she-devil who thinks she can teach our children rebellion." The men roared their approval. One placed a torch near Sarah's feet, close enough for her to feel its heat. "The devil himself couldn't stop us now," Grady proclaimed, raising the whiskey bottle in toast. A rifle cracked from the darkness beyond the firelight. The bottle exploded in Grady's hand, showering him with glass and liquor. A second shot followed immediately, dropping the man holding the torch. Chaos erupted. Men scrambled for weapons, firing blindly into the trees. More shots answered, precise and deadly. 2 more Klansmen fell, blood blooming across white robes. "It's him!" someone screamed. "The ghost!" Isaiah moved through the forest like a shadow, just as he had during the war. He'd set traps along the paths leading from the clearing, tripwires that sent men tumbling, sharpened sticks that pierced legs. Their screams added to the confusion. He reloaded his Springfield rifle behind a thick pine, listening to the panic he'd created. 3 down. Perhaps 20 more to go? Impossible odds for most men. But Isaiah wasn't most men. He'd laid his second rifle against another tree 50 yards away. Now he sprinted to it, fired twice more, then disappeared again before they could track his location. The darkness was his ally, the trees his shield. "Find him!" Grady bellowed, drawing his pistol. $50 to the man who brings me his head." The Klansmen spread out, hunting for Isaiah. But he had become the hunter, picking them off one by one as they separated. A shot to the chest, a knife across a throat. Silent and efficient, the way he'd learned to kill Confederates in nighttime raids. Near the fire, Grady grew desperate. Half his men were down, dead or wounded or fled into the night. He grabbed Sarah's hair, pressing his pistol to her temple. "Come out, Cole," he shouted. "Show yourself, or she dies." Isaiah paused behind a fallen log, calculating distances and angles. From his position, he couldn't get a clear shot at Grady without risking Sarah. A movement caught his eye. Caleb emerged from the trees, hands raised. He still wore his deputy's uniform, though it was now stained with soot and blood. "Sheriff," Caleb called, walking slowly toward the fire. "This has gone too far. Let her go." Grady's laugh was brittle with fear. "You think you can betray me twice, boy? You're next." Isaiah watched his brother approach the fire, recognizing the distraction Caleb was creating. He circled silently through the underbrush, finding a better position. "I never meant for this," Caleb said, still moving forward. "You promised no one would be hurt. And you believed me." Grady's eyes were wild now. "You people always believe what you want to hear." Isaiah lined up his shot as Caleb drew Grady's attention. Just a few more steps, and he'd have a clear angle. Grady's finger tightened on the trigger against Sarah's head. "Your brother can watch you both die." Caleb's hand dropped toward his own pistol, hesitating, torn between duty and blood. Isaiah didn't hesitate. His rifle cracked one final time. Grady staggered backward, surprise frozen on his face as blood spread across his chest. He stumbled, then fell backward into the bonfire. His robes caught instantly, flames engulfing him as he screamed and thrashed. No one moved to help him. The remaining Klansmen fled into the darkness, their courage gone with their leader. Isaiah stepped into the clearing, rifle still ready. Caleb rushed to untie Sarah, helping her away from the fire and the burning man within it. The brothers faced each other across the clearing, corpses scattered between them. The only sound was the crackling fire and Grady's fading cries. "You came," Sarah whispered, leaning against Caleb for support. Isaiah nodded once, his face unreadable. He lowered his rifle slowly, looking at his brother. "Live as a coward or die free," Isaiah said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "Choose better than you have." He turned away, walking into the smoke that drifted between the trees. Caleb called his name once, then dropped to his knees in the dirt, his body shaking with sobs. Sarah placed her hand on his shoulder, watching Isaiah's form dissolve into darkness. The flames began to die, leaving only embers and ash where men had stood. The first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky, turning the smoke silver gray. Isaiah moved deeper into the forest, leaving no trail, becoming one with the shadows. Behind him, pinewood smoldered. Before him stretched wilderness, vast and empty of men. The pines swayed in the morning breeze, branches rubbing together with sounds like whispers, as if the trees themselves spoke of what they had witnessed, as if they harbored the spirits of those who had died beneath them, their ghosts now forever bound to this blood-soaked earth. Morning came to Pinewood with a blanket of mist that clung to the earth, turning the pine forest into a ghostly landscape. The fog muffled sound, creating an eerie stillness broken only by the creak of saddle leather as a column of federal marshals rode in from Montgomery. The lead marshal, a weathered man named Hollister with a thick gray mustache, reined his horse to a halt at the edge of the clearing. What he saw made even his battle-hardened expression falter. Bodies hung from the pines, not randomly, but in a deliberate pattern that formed a perfect circle around the clearing. Each corpse was stripped of its hood, face exposed to the morning light. Badges dangled from tree branches beneath them, twisted in the breeze like strange fruit. Some wore scraps of white robes, now stained rusty brown. Others were dressed in everyday clothes, the butcher's apron, the banker's vest. "Dear God," whispered the youngest marshal, barely 20 years old. "What happened here?" Hollister dismounted, his boots sinking into the damp earth. The ground told its own story. Trampled grass, spent cartridge casings, blood-soaked soil. The ashes of a massive bonfire still smoldered at the center of the clearing, the charred remains of what appeared to be a man visible within. "Spread out," Hollister ordered. "Look for survivors." The marshals fanned through the area, counting bodies, documenting the scene. One called out from the edge of the clearing, where a set of boot prints led away from the massacre. "Got tracks here, sir. One man, moving fast." Hollister knelt beside the prints. They were deep and evenly spaced, a man who knew how to move through wilderness. The tracks led straight into the swampland that bordered the eastern edge of the pine forest. After 50 yards, they vanished where the ground turned to standing water. "He's gone," Hollister said, straightening up. "No tracking him through that." They returned to the clearing as more townsfolk arrived, drawn by the news of the marshal's presence. Their faces showed a mix of horror and something else, a grim satisfaction that made Hollister uneasy. Among them was a young black woman, supported by an older woman. Her dress was torn and dirty, her face bruised, but her eyes were clear and steady. "Miss, I need to speak with you," Hollister said, approaching her. "I'm Marshal Hollister from the federal office in Montgomery." "Sarah Burke," she replied, her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. "My father was Reverend Elijah Burke." "The preacher they lynched," Hollister nodded. "We heard about that. Were you here last night? Did you see what happened?" Sarah looked around at the dead men hanging from the trees, then back to the marshal. "I was tied to that post there," she said, pointing to a wooden stake near the fire. "They were going to kill me." "And who saved you? Who did this?" Hollister gestured at the bodies. Sarah's eyes reflected the morning light. "I saw no man, Marshal. Only fire and shadows. The wind itself seemed to bring justice." Hollister frowned. "Miss Burke, I need the truth. Someone killed these men." "The truth?" Sarah smiled faintly. "The truth is, they hanged my father, burned our homes, and terrorized us for years while the law looked away. Now they're gone, and we're still here. That's all the truth that matters." The other freedmen nodded in agreement, forming a protective circle around Sarah. None would speak of Isaiah Cole. By unspoken agreement, his name had already become something else, a secret shared, a protective myth. By afternoon, the bodies had been cut down and laid in rows for identification. Families came to claim their dead. many refusing to believe their husbands and fathers had been part of the Klan. Others turned away in shame when they saw the white hoods collected as evidence. The story of the Pinewood Massacre spread quickly through the county. Some called it divine retribution. Others whispered about a Union ghost, a black demon, a vengeful spirit. Children said the pines themselves had come alive to punish evil men. No one spoke of a mortal hand. 3 days later, Caleb Cole appeared at the temporary federal office established in town. His deputy's badge was pinned to his chest for the last time. "I'm here to resign," he told Marshal Hollister, placing his badge on the desk. His eyes were sunken, haunted by what he'd seen and done. "And to confess my part in all this," Hollister took his statement, how he'd helped Grady escape custody, believing it would prevent violence, how he'd watched his choices lead to death and fire instead. "Where will you go?" Hollister asked when they finished. Caleb looked out the window toward the distant pines. "Somewhere I can live with myself, if such a place exists." He left town that same day, riding west with only what he could carry. Some said he went to Kansas, others to California. No one saw him in Pinewood again. The freedmen began rebuilding their burned homes and church. The federal marshals stayed a month, ensuring peace held, but found no trace of Isaiah Cole, despite searching the swamps and forests. They concluded he had likely died of wounds sustained during the fight, his body lost to the wilderness. Sarah knew better. One evening, a week after the marshals departed, she carried Elijah's Bible to a small knoll overlooking the clearing where the massacre had occurred. The locals already avoided the place, claiming to hear strange sounds at night: whispers, creaking ropes, phantom gunshot. Sarah dug a small hole beneath a wooden cross she'd erected and carefully wrapped the Bible in oilcloth before placing it inside. The last page bore a single name written in dried blood: Isaiah Cole. "Your testimony is safe," she whispered, smoothing soil over the hiding place. "As is your memory." Standing, she looked out over the pines as dusk settled. The wind stirred, moving through the trees with a sound like moaning, almost musical, like a hymn sung in a deep, mournful voice. A shadow shifted far off among the trees, too tall and straight to be anything but a man. Isaiah stood at the forest's edge, watching her from a distance, rifle slung across his back. Sarah raised her hand slightly, a gesture too small for anyone else to notice. He returned it, the barest movement of his fingers. Then he turned and walked into the gathering fog, his form growing indistinct with each step, until he seemed to dissolve into the mist itself, becoming one with the forest that would forever guard his secret. 10 years passed over Pinewood like seasons changing a forest, slowly at first, then all at once. The rebuilt church stood proud beneath the oak tree that had once borne such terrible fruit. Its white boards gleamed in the summer sun, windows sparkling like jewels against the deep green of surrounding pines. Inside, 20 children sat on hand-carved benches, their heads bent over primers and slates. Light streamed through colored glass, painting their faces in patches of blue and gold. At the front stood Sarah Burke, now 40 years old with streaks of silver at her temples. Time had etched fine lines around her eyes, but had not dimmed their intensity. "Today," she said, closing the reader she held, "we'll end with a different kind of lesson." The children looked up eagerly. Miss Burke's special lessons were always their favorites. Stories of courage and truth that made history feel alive. "Who knows why our church stands beneath this oak tree?" she asked. A small girl in the front raised her hand. "Because it gives good shade?" Gentle laughter rippled through the room. "That's true, Mary," Sarah smiled, "but there's another reason. This tree reminds us." "Reminds us of what, Miss Burke?" asked a boy near the back. Sarah walked to the window and looked out at the massive oak, its branches spreading wide over the churchyard. "It reminds us that sometimes good things can grow where terrible things happened." The children grew quiet, sensing the shift in her voice. They knew pieces of Pinewood's history, whispered fragments they'd caught from parents and grandparents. 10 years ago, this tree was used for evil. Men who hated others because of the color of their skin hung my father from those branches. Sarah's voice remained steady. They thought fear would make us leave or bow down. What happened to those bad men? Mary asked softly. Sarah turned back to face her students. They met someone they feared more than anything, a man who had been a soldier, who knew how to fight, but more importantly, knew what to fight for. Outside, the wind stirred the oak leaves, making patterns of light dance across the wooden floor. His name was Isaiah Cole, Sarah continued. He hunted those men like they had hunted others. One by one, he found them in their hiding places. He showed them that their hoods and their night riding couldn't protect them anymore. The children sat transfixed. This was not a story from a distant land or time. This had happened right here, under this very tree. "What happened to him?" asked a tall boy named Daniel. Sarah looked out the window again, toward the line of pines that marked the edge of the deep forest. Some say he died in the fight. Others believe he simply walked into the woods and became part of them, that he still watches over Pinewood, making sure those men never come back. "Is it true?" Mary whispered. Sarah smiled. "What matters is that after Isaiah Cole, no one in white hoods ever rode through Pinewood again. What matters is that we can sit here, learning together, without fear." The school bell rang, signaling the end of lessons. The children gathered their books and slates, filing out into the afternoon sunshine with backward glances at Sarah. The story of Isaiah Cole would spread through supper tables across Pinewood that night, keeping his memory alive in yet another generation. Sarah remained behind, straightening benches and collecting forgotten pencils. She was so absorbed in her task that she didn't notice the figure in the doorway until his shadow fell across the floor. "You tell it well," said a voice roughened by age and weather. Sarah turned quickly. A man stood there, gray-bearded, shoulders slightly stooped, but with eyes she would have known anywhere. "Caleb," she whispered. "Caleb Cole." He stepped into the church, hat in hand. His face was weathered like old leather, deep lines carved by sun and hardship. 10 years had aged him more than they should have. "I didn't think you'd come back," Sarah said, regaining her composure. "Neither did I." Caleb's eyes roamed the rebuilt church, worked the rail lines up north until my hands couldn't take it anymore. "Winter's too cold for old bones." "And guilt brings you home?" Sarah asked gently. Caleb nodded, not bothering to deny it. That, and wanting to see what grew from the ashes. He moved to the window, looking out at the oak tree. In his hand, Sarah noticed a small bunch of wildflowers. "Those for anyone in particular?" she asked. "Thought I might leave them at the church steps, for those who didn't make it." "For my brother, wherever he is." Sarah touched his arm lightly. "He'd appreciate that, I think." They walked outside together, into the golden afternoon light. Caleb laid the flowers on the bottom step, then straightened with effort. "Did you ever forgive him?" he asked, not looking at her. "For what he did? For becoming what they feared?" Sarah considered the question, watching as the breeze lifted a petal from Caleb's flowers. "He didn't need forgiveness," she said softly. "He needed to be remembered, not as a ghost or a spirit, but as a man who saw injustice and refused to look away." Caleb nodded, his eyes moist. "I always thought there should have been another way." "There should have been," Sarah agreed, "but there wasn't. Not then. Not here." As the sun began to set, they stood in silence beneath the great oak. Night was falling over Pinewood, bringing with it the chorus of cicadas and the cool breath of the forest. From the direction of the pines came the faintest sound, something like the creak of rope against wood, barely audible beneath the insect song. Caleb shivered slightly. "Do you believe he's still out there? Watching?" Sarah didn't answer directly. Instead, she led him around the massive trunk of the oak. There, carved into the bark at eye level, were simple words cut deep enough to last decades. Isaiah Cole, the man who ended fear. "Who put that there?" Caleb asked, tracing the letters with weathered fingers. "No one knows," Sarah replied. "It appeared one morning, 5 years ago. The children think the tree grew it itself. The forest seemed to breathe around them, thousands of pine needles rustling in harmony like a living memorial. The sound rose and fell, almost like voices murmuring just beyond hearing. "I should go," Caleb said, pulling his coat tighter around himself. "Got a room at Wilson's boarding house for the night. Leaving on tomorrow's stage." Sarah nodded. "Don't be a stranger, Caleb Cole. This is still your home, too." He tipped his hat and walked away, his silhouette growing dimmer against the darkening sky. Sarah remained beneath the oak, one hand resting on the carved name of the man who had changed everything. The forest hummed its eternal song as night embraced pinewood. I hope you found that story powerful. Leave a like on the video and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. I have handpicked 2 stories for you that are even more powerful. Have a great day.